Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another in our series of video chats for the Half Earth Project Educator Ambassadors. I'm really pleased to be joined by two awesome teachers and ambassadors who are going to tell us about some really interesting things they've been doing. And we're going to focus a little bit on the Galapagos Islands, which I think most people know something about. Hey, Jonathan, how are you doing?
Good. How you doing, Dennis?
Good. Do you want to just give me a quick, where do you teach and what do you teach?
Yeah, I'm Jonathan Bauer. I teach biology and IB biology in San Jose, California.
Awesome. And hi, Erika, how are you doing?
Good, I'm doing well.
And how about you? Where and what for you?
I teach on the North Shore of Massachusetts, and I currently teach 9th grade biology as well as an upperclassman elective called Science, Ethics, and Society.
Oh yeah, if we have time, I'd love to talk about that a little bit, but we might have to have a whole separate conversation about that. I've gotten to know the two of you from a variety of sort of meetings and workshops, and but one of the really interesting things is that you're both Knowles Fellows. So maybe, Jonathan, were you going to tell us a little bit about Knowles and what kind of opportunity that's meant for you as a teacher?
Yeah, absolutely. The reason that Eric and I know each other teaching on complete opposite coasts is through this really cool opportunity called the Knowles Teacher Initiative. And one of the big projects that they have is a 5-year teaching fellowship program designed to support and really improve teaching of high school math and science teachers. And so every year there's a cohort of about 35 teachers that start this, and it involves everything from professional development with your cohort throughout the 5 years, and then support to go and seek your own professional development experiences that are relevant to you. And that's sort of where some of this Galapagos stuff that we're going to talk about has come from.
So the working group you were mentioning is we call it KELP. It stands for Knowles Experiential Learning Project. And it's a small working group within the larger subset of Knowles that was formed after we had, this incredible opportunity to take.
By the way, sorry, KELP is a great name.
I know, I can't take credit for it.
Come out a lot worse, right?
Yeah, one of our fellows came up with that when I pulled them for good names.
Yeah, could have been like GOOP, like Galapagos Organization of something. Yeah, so
that worked perfectly. Last summer we had the great fortune of taking almost 30 Knowles Fellows on 2 separate professional development opportunities to the Galapagos, and our express goal was to make resources, multidisciplinary STEM resources based in the real world ecosystem of the Galapagos that anyone who's in high schools across America, or even middle schools, or even maybe introductory college level, could use in their classrooms without having to have ever been to the Galapagos. So we're working on developing those resources now. Our working group is also hopeful to go back to the Galapagos this summer. Fingers crossed, and continue our work there. But yeah, we were very inspired by the ecosystem, by the complex management problems it presents, by, obviously we've all know about the finches and Darwin's story, but to be on the ground in the Galapagos in 2019 is a really interesting case study in how conservation is actually being managed in one of these pristine spots for biodiversity. It's a really interesting place to be and to see not only all these amazing, like, charismatic animals that we've read about, but to hear from the people who live and work there about how they view conservation and what they see their role in management is.
Yeah, one of the part of the reason for having this video chat with you is something that you had said, Erika, about, to me, the Galapagos is a great little like microcosm of the potential of Half Earth, because here you have a place where people are absolutely living with nature, and you have a lot of protections for biodiversity in place. So I'm excited to learn a little more about that. Yeah, it's great.
All right, so Galapagos and protected areas. And like I said, we're making this as part of our KELP working group. So what kind of started this for me, and what kind of made me bring the Galapagos into my conversations with you about the mapping project was overwhelmingly when I did the mapping project with both my younger and older students, when I asked them the question, do you think it's possible to conserve 50% of the United States? For the most part, their overwhelming response was no. And I thought their responses as to why were kind of interesting. So I pulled a couple of responses here. This one student said, no, even while these areas have low population density, it would disperse a huge percent of the country and they'd be forced to move to non-protected areas, which are so densely populated already. We have another student saying, after this activity, I don't think it's possible to conserve 50% of the land in the United States. Moving millions of people around all at the same time would be extremely difficult. And it would also be asking to give up 50% of the land, which would be a loss to agricultural use.
Yep.
So seeing all those responses from my students made me really kind of think about, you know, I think the number 50% is really intimidating for them. And I don't think that they have a good grasp, especially where I live on the East Coast of the United States, which is fairly densely populated, about, you know, what a vast amount of protected land could look like, and, you know, the logistics surrounding it, and how human habitation within a protected sphere could be possible in any way. So as a response to some of these answers I was getting from students, I started bringing in the Galapagos as an example of not only 50% of land being conserved, but, you know, well over 90%, and human habitation still being possible within that sphere.
Right.
All right, so I kind of chose an image from Half Earth here. So when you go to look at the Galapagos in Half Earth, it does seem like to be kind of this big blanket of protection over all the islands and the ocean around it. This soothing red kind of protected area.
Right. So that's the Galapagos archipelago. They're sort of surrounded by all that red protection. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
Which is not far off from what the actual marine protected area looks like. So
yeah, I'm sure that blob is based on the marine protected area. Yep.
Exactly. So I found a different map that kind of shows you the actual protected areas of the Galapagos. So it's a little hard to see, but basically the kind of blue color is the Galapagos Marine Reserve.
Yep.
Red color is all the parts of the Galapagos managed by the Galapagos National Park, so another form of protected area. And those little yellow pieces are areas used by humans. So not even, I thought that was interesting that this was not even really like towns or permanent human settlements. This is just the areas used by humans within the Galapagos.
So including commercial uses, housing,
Mm-hmm.
But also whatever the light industry and agriculture that's going on there. So it's almost like the inverse of how we picture so many parts of the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you can see based on the graph below that if we take this whole land into account, these human use areas account for 0.2% of this area shown on the map, which is kind of extraordinary to think about. So here's a little bit of a different view of just kind of land use. So this is showing you like different variations of land use. Again, like communities, both urban and rural, are shown. The urban areas are pink. They're so small, you might not even be able to see them on the map. So
yeah.
The Galapagos, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan, has pretty much like three like human like cities or what you call towns. By far the largest is on Santa Cruz, but there's also like permanent towns on Santa Cristobal and Isabella, and like a little bit of one, I think a little tiny one in Floriana, but not one that I've personally been to. And then there's also the rural communities. There's also people living up in the highlands of Santa Cruz or in the highlands of Isabella, not so much in like a formal town. And that's going to be that kind of like light yellow we see.
Mm-hmm.
But the rest of the zone you can see is either like impact reduction, which means obviously humans have access to it, but their access is moderate or limited in what they can and can't do. Complete conservation restoration, which is even more limited in terms of human access. And what I find kind of interesting is that there's a lot of places in the Galapagos what are called complete protection, which means like absolutely no human access aside from like special scientific research or scientific
So you
expeditions.
need a special permit to even enter those lands.
Exactly.
hmm.
There's this, Jonathan and I have been working on a project about iguana speciation, and there's a legendary rare pink iguana that only lives on like the base of one volcano in the Galapagos, but our likelihood of seeing these iguanas in person are infinitesimally small because
You clearly have to apply for access to see it.
exactly.
I
I think only a very select number of scientists even have seen these iguanas in person.
Wow.
Which, if we think about from the American perspective, that's very unusual. The idea that like there would be places that are entirely off limits to any kind of human access, including the larger scientific community.
Yeah, you may get to this later, but I'm just wondering whether either you or Jonathan know anything about. Do you have a sense of how residents feel about this? Do you get a sense that there's do they like the regulation or do they resent the regulation? I know that's simplistic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we got the opportunity to interact with a group of high school age students that are part of an ecology club. And so that was probably one of the most time we spent with local people. So our view might be a little bit skewed towards that. But the sense I got overall was that people are supportive of that kind of conservation effort. They realize what a unique place it is. And they really take their heritage of being like from the Galapagos, not really considering it like Ecuador, right? Like the people that work there as national park rangers that are from the Galapagos. Like, no, I'm from Galapagos. I'm not from Quito or Guayaquil. I'm from the Galapagos. I want to keep it conserved.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that, you might find a little bit of lack of rule following when it comes to like certain activities in like the towns and the cities that are technically supposed to be prohibited. For instance, like owning pets is technically, like dogs and cats is technically prohibited across all the islands, but all you have to do is walk around in Portayora for a day and you can see that is not a very well followed regulation.
Right.
So I think that the locals feel that like some rules are meant to apply only to, non-natives. But for the most part, I didn't meet anyone in my time there that didn't take great pride in, the conservation, the biodiversity, and like the pristine state of the islands.
Yeah. So there's some lessons to be learned about how to organize these things so that people are with it. Yeah.
I was also going to show just like a general view. So here you can see like a lot of the islands, Darwin and Wolf up here are so far away, they need to be on a separate little inset. They're some of the smaller islands.
See, I didn't know that Darwin got such a tiny little island way up there.
Yeah.
Upper left-hand corner, yeah.
But if you can see it, I mean, it's just a really complex ecosystem. You have, volcanoes, you have you have highlands, you have more jungly areas, you have beaches, you have marine environments. It's a really complex ecosystem to manage, and just a lot of ground to cover. And I think that putting a lot of it under conservation is a big task. I mean, to manage it and monitor it, but it's a pretty impressive effort.
One of the things, I don't know if this comes up now or later, that has allowed the monitoring of all this to be a little bit easier, I would say, is that so much of the tourism in the Galapagos is based on boats and boat tours and diving tours and things like that. And so a lot of what they're doing is GPS tracking with boats and certain spots. And I think, do we have maybe some slides later, Erika?
About fishing, but like, GPS tracking is really important, I think.
There's hours of the day that they're allowed to even be in these places.
So highly,
it gets all the way to that specific. Yeah.
So tourism is important for lots of reasons, big source of revenue, but managing the impact that human activity would have is super important. And so you're saying they take it really seriously.
Yeah. Oh yes, very seriously. So one of the ways to take it seriously is, I won't play this video for you, but but when you're coming in to the Galapagos on the airplane, they make everyone kind of watch this slightly silly but also stern video message about things you can and can't do in the Galapagos. And people take it very, very seriously. You know, I've traveled a lot in my lifetime and heard a lot of, you know, rules that tourists are supposed to follow, but in some places it seems like, you know, remembering about those rules stops as soon as you like get this message.
Right.
But in the Galapagos, that's definitely not the case. There are very strict rules about how tourists can engage with the landscape and with the marine environment. And it's a pretty intense rundown, I would say, you get before even setting foot on the islands.
That's great.
And I want to end with just a few pictures. There's a lot of pictures around the Galapagos. You know, your protection depends on you. All these kind of repeating all of these kind of rules and regulations. And I like this sign to kind of end that visitors are respectfully reminded that the indigenous wildlife of these islands is strictly protected by law. And as we said earlier in the presentation, it's really apparent if you go to the Galapagos that not only is it a place of like rich history and, you know, still fascinating to learn about Darwin's expedition there and all the evolution and natural selection examples that show up there. But for me, one of the most fascinating things I didn't expect was to see it in 2019 and how this, you know, small group of islanders is trying to actively manage one of the largest conservation sites in the world.
Yeah. So one of my background tends to be more in experiential education, things like outdoor ed and that kind of stuff. And then I sort of got away from that a little bit into, you know, being in a formal classroom teaching. And so this sort of experience, one, has sort of like reawakened that for me, is really trying to make these experiences as connected and grounded in real phenomena that are like relevant for my students. And so trying to use like every bit of, you know, nature that is around us, even though my school tends to be it's a pretty urban environment. And then even with that, I think it's also just nice, like as important as it is to have something that's local and relevant for kids that they can really grab onto, there is something to be said about like those charismatic species. And like you were mentioning about the Galapagos, like there is this allure and grandeur of such a place. And those can be just as engaging too. And things like just that they're so unique. One of the tasks that we were developing out of this was about the evolution of iguanas, and just the fact that like the only like really marine lizard in the world, like just that evolution, like how did it evolve to be swimming and be feeding on algae that, you know, is like 40 feet deep in the water.
Yep.
Is just sort of a really incredible thing that we can focus on.
Yep. How about you, Erika? Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think what's interesting for me, what I've been thinking about a lot in my own classroom, it's kind of as you were saying that the Galapagos kind of elevated the status of non-human organisms and valuing biodiversity for biodiversity's sake rather than what it can do for humans.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. It's on my mind a lot right now because I'm working with my ethics class on animal ethics right now. And I think I see a lot, like there's a huge amount of, you know, anthropocentric thinking that like a lot of my students say when we did the half-rep activity, well, this would impact humans badly. They would be inconvenienced. So therefore we can't do it. And I think it's really hard to break that mindset and say like, there's another way where humans and other non-human species can both live together, but it's going to require a little bit of inconvenience on our part. And shifting our thinking is just really important. I think the Galapagos is a good example of that.